I'm far enough along at that point in time to be getting excited about the role of nutrition in cancer. But to see these kind of results, generalized as they may be, nonetheless pointing to something really significant. So let's go back a few more years. That's me there in 5 or 6 years ago, I think now. Combining. I was raised on a dairy farm, as many of you may know, and it's me there on the front, sort of combining so we could get some money to go to school. We were raised on a dairy farm. That's my brothers and my father's mother. But so on the farm, to the extent that I thought about this, and I have to be honest, I didn't think about it, but it's just being, sort of unconsciously aware that the milk that we were producing on the farm was valued in large measure because it had protein in it, high quality protein. It was also valued because of the calcium content too. I went away then to Cornell University to graduate school. And there, I did my doctoral dissertation shown on the right. Won't go into details there, but just generally speaking, it was designed to show, it was designed especially by my professors and others, to show the importance of protein. It was designed to try to figure out ways to grow animal protein more efficiently. So there you have it. I mean, that's where it was. Then it was another 10-year period when I was working in the Philippines and the State Department with the Virginia Tech, where in fact there, my responsibility was to be coordinator of a national program of developing sort of childhood feeding centers, again, focused on protein. And the big deal about that at that time with these poor children who were malnourished and many of them almost starving, the big thing that we were intending to do, my senior colleague and I, was to make sure to close the protein gap, as it said in those days. Such was the emphasis given to protein, across the land, publicly, professionally, politically, whatever. It was, everybody was obviously knowing we have to get as much protein as we can, okay? That's what our deal was, is to, oh, good, thank you. Can you hear me better? Yeah, okay. So I ended up in the Philippines. There, attempted to identify ways for these children to get more protein. That's why they're starving. That's why they're malnourished. There was so much emphasis given to that. So in reality, those three events, personal, up on the left, my graduate research directed to improving the production of protein down in the Philippines. So it was all about protein. The more, the better. And I think many of you can identify with that. How many of you have sort of gotten into this business and your friends ask you, where do you get your protein from? This idea still hangs around. So I want to work on that theme a bit. So now, I'm in the Philippines. I was aware we're supposed to be getting more protein. I can't get into all the details on that particular point of view. But about that time, this study came out in India, showing that in experimental animals, in this case rats, that when these rats are exposed to a carcinogen that gives rise to liver cancer, okay, it starts out, they're exposed to a carcinogen that gives rise to liver cancer. If they are fed a couple of levels of protein, high and low, that their thesis was, or hypothesis, was that the animals given the higher levels of protein would get less cancer. Such was the importance of protein. It does everything. If we could just get more protein consumed, we could have less cancer. That was our idea. And as you can see here, the opposite appeared. The opposite appeared. They couldn't even go along with their own results. Quite frankly, they went back and redid the study in a very different way and attempted to show it was the reverse. I had a chance to go to India about 25 years after that to talk about the fact that I didn't see it that way, that the animals given the highest protein levels got 100%, small study, 100% got the liver tumors, and the ones that fed 5%, none did. That was striking. Increasing protein, increasing cancer. How do you like that? So, I mean, so I'm wearing just two hats, and essentially I'm interested in the science. I want to deal with the facts, but on the other hand, we're all worshiping protein, if you will. And somehow like this comes along and kind of shakes the bushes a bit. So I came home, got a grant. It lasted for the next 27 years, and I really wanted to know, is that really true? And if it is true, how does it work? What's what we call mechanisms? So here's a little chart showing the first 12 weeks as the cancers are growing. I mean, all cancers start with a mutation, with a mutated gene. So they're exposed to a carcinogen that causes a mutation, okay? Then they're fed 20% of 5%, just like the Indian workers did. You can see the difference. It's huge. It's huge. Ones fed 20%, they're all getting cancer. It's growing fast. This is just during the first 3 months, which is quite a long time for a rat. But here's I want to show you this because something came up. This wasn't exactly done in this order, but here's what happened. I was curious about this idea that cancer is caused by genes, namely mutations. Mutation is, for those of you who are not familiar with this, our genes are mutated by chemical carcinogens. They're changed so that now the new gene, if it's not repaired, then becomes the basis for cancers to grow. I wanted to know in this particular case whether, let's say, after 2.5 months, they got the exposure to the carcinogen. At that time, you would think that all the mutations are all reversed, right? Or they're gone, or the carcinogen's not there. We fed them 20% protein, and lo and behold, what it showed was we saw a tumor response after one would have thought those genes are gone. No, they were still there, kind of hanging around. That led to a major consideration that over the years, it turns out that cancer, in this case here, suggested cancer doesn't form as a result of the gene or the mutation. It functions primarily, in this case at least, as a function of nutrition. Very different. So here's another way to look at the same thing. I ended up with a number of ideas that now since have become very provocative, even more provocative, in the sense that it tends to challenge the way we think or the way we do things. So here's my first challenge. Cancer begins with a mutated gene that may lie dormant until developed by nutrition, not by genes. Just think about that. We all have some genes that could give rise to cancer. We have the seeds, if you will. And the reason, for the most part, not to oversimplify, the reason we tend to get cancer is because we're feeding the wrong nutrition to those genes. So they come up and they form cancer. Here's another way to look at this. Same basis I showed before. I wanted to know in this particular case, what happens if we change the diet from 20 to 5% or 5% to 20%, if you will? Here's the results we got. First 3 weeks, these early cancers are growing in response to 20%. Turned off for the next 3 weeks. Turned back on, turned off. To me, that was really a spectacular sort of thing. The idea that we could take nutrition right within normal levels of consumption, more or less, and adjust it. Adjust the amount being consumed, and actually change the course of the development of the disease. That was very exciting. So, in a sense, we were turning on and turning off cancer experimentally. So there's my second challenge. Cancer development is reversible by protein nutrition. That is, it's turned on and off. And I'm saying that cancer is a nutritional disease. That's heresy. That is heresy of the first order, to me even suggested such a thing. But that's what we were getting. I couldn't turn away from the results we were getting. Protein is turning it off, you take it away, it turns cancer off, okay? However, at that time, in the cancer industry, and still today, the National Cancer Institute, the American Cancer Society, and other cancer organizations, they say right up front, right on the face page of the internet, if you want to take a look, how cancer rises. Cancer is a genetic disease, so they say. Cancer is a function of what happens to our genes. When we convert a normal gene to a cancer gene, if you will, because of chemical carcinogens, that's a genetic disease. Okay, here's what comes out of that kind of thinking that still is with us today. If cancer is only a disease of genes, okay, we don't have much control, really, of what we're going to get or not going to get. So the idea that it starts out with a mutation, and now we knew then, incidentally too, mutations don't reverse. They don't come backwards. They kind of stay there. They don't really reverse, except an occasional 1 out of a million or something of that sort. But in any case, the genes that we may get that have the potential for causing cancer are there. So on that basis, if cancer is a genetic disease, it can't be reversed, what do you do about it? What do we do with it when we're interested in treating cancer? We can't make them reverse. That doesn't happen. The only thing to do, and they don't quite say it this way, but I've been in this field long enough to know that this is a fact. The only way to deal with it is to kill the cancer cells. To kill the cancer cells with drugs. To some extent, the more toxic, the better. The more targeted, too, I should say. So we use drugs to control cancer and to treat people with cancer, because it's all presumed that the disease is formed by genes. Now, I can apply the same argument to a considerable extent for other diseases as well. What I'm trying to say here is that we have a world in which we live, and we subconsciously almost think this way. Diseases form, is it because of genes? Oh, they all start with genes at some place. Is it because of genes we have, or is it because of what we do with those genes that are there? That's a really big sort of consideration, in my view. This leads to the idea of what I call genetic determinism. We live with it. We have lived with this idea throughout. And we have a major industry now in cancer research and cancer treatment. We have a major industry that relies on the presumption that cancer is a genetic disease, and we have to kill that cancer by developing drugs to treat the people to kill the cancer. And those drugs are, quite frankly, very toxic. We call them cytotoxic, the majority of them. That means they kill cells, cyto cells, toxic. So that's the cancer treatment. But then we can ask a question this way. Here's some data that came out now. This is 2007, I think it was the first time it came out. Seemed like to me that was yesterday, but in any case, there's the history of this. So we can ask ourselves, how well is that idea working using chemotherapy agents? Well, some enterprising scientists from Australia and the United States got together, and they got access to a big database of a whole lot of cancer patients whose records had been stored at NIH. They got their hands on this big database, and they simply wanted to ask this question: how well are those cytotoxic chemotherapy agents working? And they had a collection of information on 22 different kinds of cancer. I mean, this is a big study. And so they were simply asking, how was it working? Well, the traditional way of asking that question and looking at results is to say, how effective are these chemotherapy agents? How effective is it to extend the 5-year survival rates? That's that's the hands-on model that they all use. How well are they working to extend the cancer personnel beyond 5 years? So let me say this first. The average cost of developing a new cytotoxic chemotherapy agent is technically, this is 2014, $1.3 to $1.8 billion for one chemical. That's a lot of money. Just something to think about that. Actually, it's around $2.5 billion when you add in so-called opportunity costs. You know, the money you could have earned had you done something else with it, essentially. So there's a lot of money here being spent for chemotherapy. 22 different cancer types, as I said. In the aggregate, a couple exceptions, but in the aggregate, these drugs were only extending 5-year survival rate by 2.1%. That's background. That could easily be argued it would have been just the same as doing nothing. So the whole cancer treatment industry is spending a heck of a lot of money, in my view, causing a lot of, unfortunately, confusion and suffering. But at the same time, with the results that we get like this, I really think this is pretty extraordinary. And incidentally, these chemotherapy agents that are used, many of them actually cause cancer on their own. So after the fact, you know, a person survives, they can follow them up to some extent. It actually, there's some of them, quite a number of them, have that property. They're toxic because of their chemical reactivity, like a mutagen, basically. They're mutation things. And so toxic is this material that now the advertisement is given for if you go to a cancer patient room, in the bathroom, they now have to hang up a sign. It says, flush the toilet 3 times. Because if the cancer patient is using the facility, there might be a little trace of these toxins that somebody might touch. That's the nature of the agents that are being injected in order to control the cancer, to kill the cancer cells. That's why this is a big deal. That's why I get really quite passionate about it, because what we're ignoring throughout this whole discussion in all these years is a possibility, just a possibility, that nutrition might play a role. And we need to know how. We haven't done that kind of research. I'm talking about treatment in this particular case, not just prevention. Now I want to move forward to another question. This goes back to my days in seeing how protein causes cancer in animals. And so this is the scheme that we use in research, those of us in cancer research. We divide the whole process from stage 1 is initiation. That's when the mutations occur. That can happen within minutes, hours, whatever, a very short time. Then these cells, if they are converted to a cancer cell, then they go through maybe years, during which time they're growing and dividing and eventually growing as a tumor. We call that promotion. And then they finally, when we know we have something, we get diagnosed with it. That's, of course, a serious, really serious stage. That's progression. Notice how those errors are there. The consensus is, what I just told you a moment ago, the consensus has been that once cancer starts, it's going to keep on going. And about the only way we can do something about it is to kill those cells with those agents. Well, it turns out, I wanted to look for mechanism. I want to figure out, you know, how does this protein thing work? Is there any evidence, any way we can explain it? So let's look at the first stage, initiation. I got listed there a lot of technical things we did. Each one of these things we did usually involved a graduate student of mine for a whole Ph.D. dissertation, so it would take like 2 or 3 years to do some of this research on average. In any case, I was looking for the mechanism, the elusive mechanism, because if we could find the key mechanism, guess what? Then we could go out and maybe find a drug to stop that reaction. That's fundamental to the entire drug industry, by the way. We're going to get one thing, we're going to find it. All these things are 5 things. 5 things. Doing that over some period of years, 10, 12 years. And then I wanted to go to promotion stage. Okay, assuming it only goes in one direction. But in reality, it's reversible. That's what our work was showing, and we weren't the first to do that. There was some evidence of this way back in 1939, not very well publicized, the whole idea that cancer could be reversed, turned on and turned off kind of thing. So we looked for mechanisms there too. If we got 5 of them there during the initiation stage, every one of them, when the high protein was increased, every one of those sort of mechanisms became operational, all in the same direction to promote cancer formation. Then during the second stage here, promotion, again, we looked for a bunch. I wish I could spend an hour or two talking about each one of these 10, but I won't get into that, into those kind of details. But here's the bottom line. All those mechanisms, increasing the high protein diet increases the entry of the carcinogen into the cell. It increases an enzyme that activates the carcinogen. It increases the amount that binds the DNA that gives rise to the mutation and so forth. So I don't want to go into too much more detail about that. But here's the key. 10 reactions that we explored, a couple more actually too. Every time we looked for a mechanism to explain the effect of protein on cancer, we found one. Now, some of that research was more convincing than others, but every one of those observations was the same thing. When protein goes up in the diet, right, all of these reactions are turned on simultaneously and work together. So if anyone doubted there's no way to explain this, they should come and look at some of the work we did. So what this showed was that there is no, it dawned on me at that point in time, what is the drug industry? Why are we so concerned about developing a drug, be it for cancer or other things too? Because as it turns out, as I'll show you in a moment, it's far, far more complex than this. And the mere idea that somehow we could find one reaction and then maybe create a chemical to actually alter that reaction in such a way to get the result we want, that's what we're talking about here. So the high protein diet, actually, I listed a couple here and I won't go into it, actually attenuated. The high protein diet actually decreased our own cells' ability to prevent cancer. For those of you who are familiar, we know about DNA repair, you probably know what I'm talking about, or intercepting other systems in our body that's used to prevent that. So the high protein diet is really insidious. It's turning on 8 mechanisms that drive it to form cancer in a sense. 2 of the mechanisms turned them down. Guess what? Those 2, they should have been going higher because they were protecting us. That's what nature gave to us. So when I finally got to the stage here, this idea of a high protein diet, and it's not that high, we're talking about in the realm of what we all do, especially we eat meat, that this is the kind of thing that goes on. In 2002 to 2005, I was working with my son, who now, by the way, has got his own physician degree. He's a medical director, in fact, of a very significant research program at a major medical school now, and has some studies going on at the moment on using a whole food plant-based diet to actually treat disease like this. One study, he has a group of about 15 women with metastatic breast cancer. These are women who have the breast cancers returned. They're in a serious way. So he's testing this whole idea of using a whole food plant-based diet. Not a drug, the whole food, to see what can happen. More than that a little bit down the road. But in any case, when he and I were working together, writing a book and that sort of thing, I started looking at the literature. How much of these really prominent observations might have existed in the past? All these diseases here. There is evidence in the scientific literature to suggest that they all behave the same way. I mean, you have to kind of twist around and reinterpret and stuff. But a whole food plant-based diet prevents, suspends, and or cures all these diseases. So all of a sudden, here's a new idea. We're not talking about targeted effects, one mechanism, one disease, one this, one that. We're talking about something very special about the whole food itself. Not doing just one thing. It's doing just across the board, a whole bunch of stuff. So this whole food plant-based diet effect is broad. That's an exciting idea. Fundamental to our lives, in a sense. You eat this way, it makes a lot of difference in terms of all kinds of conditions, not just cancer. The effect is really rapid. It's amazingly rapid. We were doing some of this work years ago ourselves. Upon consumption of something, you'll begin to see things change within hours in some cases. Within hours. Certainly within days, weeks, whatever. So the whole food plant-based diet effect eventually is what I came to learn. It happens very fast. It happens very fast. And if the dietary change is sustained, the whole food plant-based diet is not something you jump in here today and you correct a problem and then you go back doing what you did before. No. The whole food plant-based diet, you have to keep doing it, and I'm sure all of you know that. Not to come in today and then go back to doing what you did, stay with it. So when it's sustained, then we see these remarkable things that Dr. Esselstyn, Dr. Ornish, and others have done with heart disease, and others have done some with type 2 diabetes. This is quite a number of years later when I was onto this. But in any case, we can use this diet. Here's the story of the future. We can use this diet not just to prevent future problems. We can use this diet to actually reverse existing problems. That's called treatment. That's called treatment. And when we do it with a whole food, everything working together, again, everything working together in a very consistent, impressive way, it turns out that kind of approach has almost no side effects. Whereas drugs, in contrast, are focused on one thing at a time. All the drugs have side effects, unanticipated side effects, some serious. So the drug approach says one thing, and we know how it works and what it does. The nutritional approach is something different. So I'm just simply saying that nutrition, the whole food plant-based diet, basically, I think a case can be made for this with lots of numbers. The whole food plant-based diet cures more diseases than all the best of the pills and procedures combined. That is our future. My son, I just mentioned to you, has been doing this kind of work too at this medical school where he is. He turned his attention recently to chronic kidney disease, just another disease. It's a serious problem. It's very costly, by the way. It's one of the real cost factors in medical care. 35 to 40 million people have chronic kidney disease, even more if you count those with diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, and hypertension. It's a big number. It's a big number, very worrisome. And it's actually been increasing in recent years. And the average cost per year, and how we bring in consideration of the cost of health care. People who have kidney disease, they're going on the verge or going to dialysis. That's a difficult proposition, I think all of you know. It costs, in the latest figures, the annual cost per year is $75,000 a year above Medicare costs. That breaks the banks for an awful lot of people and causes an awful lot of misery. So we're talking about a big deal. So he as I said, Tom, had together and he followed closely a 69-year-old man who was overweight. He had chronic kidney disease. He had type 2 diabetes. He had hypertension. I mean, he was sick, obviously. He was on the verge of going into dialysis. I said, I'll try it. So Tom got him and organized his diet and made sure he stayed with it. Got to stay with it. And the results, and this was just published in the British Medical Journal, which is one of the top journal in medicine, quite frankly, of this kind. So it's getting some recognition in the medical community for this sort of approach. This man was on 9 pharmaceuticals at the time he got into this, very sick. The insulin was decreased from 210 units to 70 units in 4 days. See how fast it was? 5 of those drugs, he dropped them within 2 months. He's off of 5 of his drugs, the insulin dropped, and then for 2 more, the dose was halved. I mean, this is stuff that's recorded. It's really watched over closely. It observes, all the rules that we have to follow and should follow in doing really good formal research. The big deal, kidney disease, it depends on having a good glomerular filtration rate. That's the means by which the liquid is flowing through our kidneys, in good shape. And so this gentleman had a rate of flow, if you will, of 45, which is getting near stage 4. That's dialysis time. At 45, he increased it during that time from 45 to 74%. 73%, and he felt just great after 4.5 months. Chronic kidney disease. Can you imagine that? Chronic kidney disease. Now, there are some observations made from time to time, anecdotal kinds of things, claims have been made, but in this case, and the reason I want to point this out, is that this has been published in British Medical Journal. Really a top journal. That's what we need to do in this business, is to do the research properly, well, and then get it into the system so that the professionals begin to understand this. I'll explain more in a moment what I mean by that. So I say nutrition of whole plant-based foods prevents and treats illness and disease outcomes. Both prevention and treatment. Same formula. It's just really amazing. So let me show you just a jump ahead here, jumping around a little bit here. We spend a lot of money in this country, as you'll know, for healthcare. Big debate. We argue until it's silly at times. It's really foolish, these arguments we have. But here's a list of the amount of money we spend in 39 countries like us as of 2018, 2019. These are recent figures. Here's how much money and drug costs we spend the dollars per capita. Look where the U.S. is. We're way above all the others. Isn't that pretty amazing? Is that because we aren't literate in nutrition? What if we knew something about nutrition? What if we told the public about nutrition? What if a lot of people start doing what a lot of you folks are doing? Would healthcare costs go down? So we spend a lot of money. We also use the most pharmaceuticals of any country in the world. By far, there we are, number one. We spend the most money, we use the most drugs. You know, some of us think this is the greatest system in the world because we do that. Again, why are we using drugs and not nutrition? So you say, what do we get for this? What do we get for this with all this money spent? Especially in the way in which it is spent. Life expectancy puts us way down the list, about 44th. How can we spend so much money and use so many drugs and get down there in life expectancy? Now, I know some of you are more familiar with the details of this kind of methodology. You'll say, wait a minute, you got to do this, got to do that. But overall, the grand scheme of things, our life expectancy is lower than most of those countries. Yet we spend by far and away the most money. When is there going to be time? When we're in the healthcare debate right now that's going on, when is it going to be time when people on either side of the aisle start talking about reducing healthcare costs by making people well? That's another whole discussion. That's another whole discussion that I spent a lot of time in policy development, so I can sort of elaborate on that in a moment. But quite frankly, the public's not being told. The public's not being told this. Again, nutrition literacy. Now let's move on to a couple more ideas, kind of big ideas. This goes back to some of my own research many years ago. We were using protein to turn on cancer, not paying much attention to what kind of protein it was. We just got the protein. We were using casein, the main protein in cow's milk, to turn the cancer on. Coming from a dairy farm, that's a little bit uncomfortable for a while. But in any case, we were using casein to turn it on. So we tried, a couple of my students actually got involved, and we checked out this system with soy protein. Soy protein doesn't do this. It's rather representative of other plant proteins too. Plant proteins don't seem to have this property. Either in this case, very narrow, but it also has, plant proteins don't turn on the development of cholesterol in the blood either. It doesn't turn on heart disease either. So here we see a big distinction between animal proteins and plant proteins, and there is really, as a group, there are major differences between the two in the way they behave. Can't get into that because of time. So animal proteins promote disease formation more effectively than plant proteins in the form of whole food. I used to have an opportunity years ago of being in the political scene a little bit, speaking before congressional committees and that sort of thing. That's kind of come to a halt to some extent because, you know, I'm talking nonsense, according to them. I would like to get back actually and speak to one or two of the candidates that are now running. I had spoken to those kind of people before and informed them of what this is. They talk about health care, reducing health care costs, but they're missing the boat. I wanted to get the government out of the business of basically telling the public what they should do, because they are saying things and are backed by industry. And the reason all that happens, I have to add this, the reason that happens, in my view, is because of the Supreme Court 2010 decision, Citizens United. Now we can buy politicians. We do. We buy politicians. Those politicians then sort of tag along behind the people who are paying for their elections. And so the information that comes out from the Department of Agriculture or the Department of Health is missing the mark. It's really missing the mark, and we got to find ways, you know, to get in there and make ourselves heard.